Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the most terrifying we need to leave right now moment you've ever had? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Hiking in the mountains, the sun was setting, and we heard this low guttural growl that just vibrated through the trees. No idea what it was, but the hair on my neck stood up, and we booked it down that trail faster than I thought possible. It felt as though an unfriendly entity was pursuing us. 2 a.m. or so, driving on an unlit road. There was a guy lying on the road, perpendicular to it. The person driving slowed down and started to take off his seatbelt to move him off the road. Something felt off, so I told him not to stop and drive around. The body wasn't there anymore on the way back. It could have been a drunken man, or it could have been a trap. I'll never know. I was driving through Mexico, north of Monterrey. I was sitting in a large suburban car when I felt a sudden bump from behind. Look over to see a taxi with 2 guys in the front. They were waving for me to pull over. I noticed there was no back seat. I immediately thought, nope, I'm not pulling over to end up robbed, hard, and shot in the desert. I drove away, leaving them in the dust. I was in Curitiba, Brazil, at a communist-themed bar called Fidel. The bartender was wearing a Che Guevara hat and sort of had that look. I was with like 4 other Americans. After a while, the bar emptied out. We were the only ones in there aside from the bartender. Unexpectedly, the bartender approached the door, secured it, and shut a metal shutter, trapping us inside. He looked at us and pointed to a stairwell and said, "Upstairs now." We were all freaked out, but figured better do what he says because he seemed serious. We went upstairs to this small room with chairs and a coffee table, thinking he was going to rob us, kill us, or something else, and I was looking for a window or some way to get out. We wait there in tense silence for a few minutes. Then he comes upstairs with a huge bong and explains that he closed the shutter because one of the bar's previous customers had harassed tourists, pulled a knife on someone the other day, and had a tendency to loiter outside the bar drunk. He suggested we wait upstairs for 30 minutes or so until the guy had stumbled home. Then he smoked us out of his huge bong, and we'd had a laugh before going back to the hostel. Leading a group of students from a boarding school to a roller skating rink was not particularly frightening. We pull up, and there's a KFC next door. Kids always want fast food, so I said, okay, I'll get a Coke and then go to the rink. When I got to the register, the cashier said, "Those seem like lovely kids. It is always pleasing to hear that they are displaying politeness." I say something like, "Thanks, yeah, they are lovely kids." She replies, "You probably don't want to be here after 9. Thankfully, the kids figured out that a metal detector at a roller skating rink is a positive indication we don't want to stay long. We left at 8:15. I flew into a smaller terminal at the Cancun International Airport with 2 friends. I'm American and they're European nationals. After passport control, a border patrol agent says they have a taxi waiting if we'd like to take it. I decline, saying I'd rather take the shuttle to the main airport, but my 2 friends tell me I'm being paranoid and get into the car. It was locked from the inside, but luckily, the Mexican police showed up before the car started driving. They tell us it's an illegal taxi, and they offer to give us a ride to our hotel instead. Before my friends can answer, I say thanks but no thanks, and we finally take the shuttle. We managed to secure a safe ride to our hotel by calling a real taxi. It was one of the few times being a paranoid American really worked out. As a child, I participated in a wilderness camping trip with counselors in the mountains. We had just set up camp when all of a sudden, people from higher up were fleeing down. and everyone was in a panic. There was a forest fire rapidly descending toward us. The counselors basically threw what they could back in the vans and wrangled up about 15 kids and got us out. We entered and we ended up at a random restaurant, and as an adult, I can't help but think about how terrifying it must have been for those young counselors, tasked with ensuring the safety of their group of 10-year-olds. Won't be as bad as some, but I was driving in remote Cambridgeshire fens with 40-ish miles of terrible roads. The sun was going down, and we pulled into a dodgy flat-roof pub to use the bathroom. Went in. The bar was completely full of blokes silently watching the TV. Not one of them moved, said anything, or acknowledged me in any way. Not even the barman. When I reached the bathroom, the light was out, forcing me to relieve myself in the darkness. Blokes were in the same positions when I got out. Got back in the car. My girlfriend said she'd needed that loo too. Told her to put her seatbelt back on because we were leaving now. Before I could, and were burnt in the wicker man. I am aware that it may appear absurd. I simply did not wish to be present when the sun set. We drove at a high speed until we reached the motorway, at which point we pulled over once more. I'm not sure why, but it was one of the creepiest and most unnerving experiences I've ever had. Something told me to scarper. I was staying at a roadhouse in the Avenue of the Giants. The roadhouse had an attached bar and restaurant, and the locals were talking about possible mountain lions in the area. Early the next morning, I drove a few miles north, stretched, and set out for my run. I heard what sounded like a child wailing a few yards away. In the complete silence of the pre-dawn, the sound was horrifying. I've never run faster in my life to my car. The shoot took place in the parking lot of a mall. Everyone bum-rushed in the opposite direction, which for me and about 24 people was inside an Apple store. We all hurried into the store's closet until we received the all clear. Apparently, it was a couple of idiots fighting over a parking space and not some mass shooter. It was scary though. I am a tourist from Europe who is currently visiting New York. This tourist mistakenly took a taxi to the wrong neighborhood. As we stepped out of the taxi, we noticed a group of men sitting on a staircase in front of a house. They immediately nodded their heads, indicating that we were in the wrong neighborhood, so we left immediately. My mom and I were homeless and lived in and out of our car, which has challenges. We attempted to park in more upscale areas, but the lack of privacy made us stand out. One night, 2 dudes started banging on the windows and yelling what sounded like German. We live in Massachusetts, USA. You never really slept when you were sleeping in a car. It was kind of just this half sleep. So Mom instantly woke up, turned the key, and we left. She made peace with my grandpa after that, and we stayed with him, thank God. So, although scary, thank you. Darkly dressed, possibly German, carjacker, dudes. Not as ominous as the rest, but I was in a pet store killing time before an appointment. Suddenly I was filled with dread. As an anxious person, this isn't totally unusual, so I initially tried to talk myself out of it for a minute or two, which of course felt like forever. I was so uncomfortable that I thought, screw it, I don't need to be here. I went down the aisle to the side of the store to loop around back to the front door in the center. As soon as I got to the side of the aisle, a BMW SUV came crashing through the glass windows, knocking over the aisles, straight into the cash register. The vehicle could have been and had struck me directly. Remarkably, Nobody sustained any injuries. The driver accidentally pressed the gas pedal, causing her to become extremely upset. I walked in a bit of daze. It still elicits a sense of unease as I type. I was in a store with a friend. I was looking at the aisle with my back to most of the store. I felt a presence coming up behind me, so I turned around really fast. A man confronts me directly, crouching slightly and extending his hand toward my waist. He either tried to grab my ass or tried to grab my wallet, but when I turned around, we locked eyes. He quickly went to another aisle, and I stood there for a second wondering what almost happened. When I looked up again, he was staring straight at me from across the store, with just his eyes, eyebrows, and forehead visible from over the aisle shelves. It was the scariest look. His eyes looked enraged. My friend didn't notice that anything happened, but when I saw him glaring at me I told her immediately, "We need to go." She didn't ask questions, and we left. I didn't report it, but I wish I would have. I was scared and just wanted to leave. Another time I was walking down the street and saw a guy start following me. I tried to take a different route home until he stopped, but he followed me across 3 streets and into an apartment complex. I got lost inside the apartment complex. I somehow ended up in a fenced courtyard that couldn't find the way out of, and he was still following me. I had to climb up an embankment to get out. I could not wait to get home. Also, I unknowingly got in the car of a driver who was on coke and extremely agitated. You can guess how that ride went. Okay, last one. I promised I was very young, maybe 7 or 8. I was playing outside of my cul-de-sac with some neighbor kids around the same age as me. All of us were girls. This huge maroon van pulls up in the cul-de-sac with the windows rolled down. He pulls up slowly to where my friends and I were playing on the sidewalk. He tells me, "I need to go to the hospital. Do you know where it is? Can you take me to the hospital?" I told him I didn't know where it was. We all ran inside after that. I was longboarding back home after being at a friend's. It was like 3 a.m. and I was slightly drunk. I'm in the middle of my city, longboarding my way peacefully. I saw 4 guys walking together in front of me, coming my way, and spreading to, I assume, let me through, like 2 on each side of the street. Before I have time to think, I'm passing the first guy, who hits me in the back of the neck with a telescopic baton. I never went that fast in my life. I guess they were surprised I didn't fall. They threw a few glass bottles at me and ran after me, but I was luckily faster. I had a huge bruise on my neck for a few weeks. Don't worry, and I don't want to know what would have happened if they got a hold of me. When you first started telling the story, I was reading it, and I'm like, longboarding. And I kept thinking about surfing for a second. I was like, wow, that's so cool. You can surf home. And then I realized you're talking about skateboard. So, sorry. Anyway, a lot of these are good. So I appreciate all these stories today. Thanks, guys. I was in China, and I and a bud were walking late in a pretty heavily trafficked part of the city. There was this guy handing out girl cards, which are like little business cards for brothels, as well as scams where they'll beat you up for your money. We ignored him. Then I heard him on the phone line a second later, "Get over here, quick." I heard that and noticed the usual police presence had left. So I turned to my friend who didn't speak Chinese and told him we had to get out of there. We retraced our steps, hailed a taxi from the street we had just crossed, and swiftly left the area. I was hiking with my now husband on a 10,000-plus-year-old Indian trail, now known as El Camino Real de los Tejas. We came to a pond that was eerily quiet, and I felt a twinge in my gut that it wasn't a safe place to be. He thought I was crazy when I told him it was too quiet and not to stand close to the water's edge. I soon started hearing alligator calls, and across the water was a huge gator coming right at us. I told him to get out now. We ran back to the ranger station, and as we were leaving, I asked about what I saw. So she nonchalantly said, "Oh yeah, that's just Snappy." She acted as if it was a common occurrence. I was living in Europe and was walking down the street at night, not very late, maybe 8 p.m., with my boyfriend at the time. He was talking rather loudly and clearly in American English. A guy walking down the street ahead and perpendicular to us looked over at us and kept eyeing us. He had something baton-like in hand and was swinging it around by his side a bit. I quietly told my boyfriend to shut up, but of course he still loudly asked why. I said that guy is giving me seriously bad vibes, and he brushed me off. We turned down the same street that guy was walking on because my boyfriend insisted on picking up some food, and it was the only street with restaurants still open. I made us walk on the far side of the street. Sure enough, that guy had stopped and was waiting in the shadows. When he saw us, he started following us. We entered the restaurant, and he trailed behind us, sitting at a table without placing an order. By then, my boyfriend believed me, but he insisted on still getting his food. I could see, at that time, the guy was carrying an umbrella, but the way he was holding it suggested he intended to not use it for rain. It wasn't raining that evening ever. We got my boyfriend's food to go and left, and of course, that guy followed us. Luckily, a large group of people came out of a bar or club, and a couple of doors down, so I grabbed my boyfriend's hand and wormed us into the middle of them, and then we dashed down a small cut-through street, and we ran to get around the curve so we couldn't be seen. Thankfully, we lost the guy at that point, but I have no doubt we were very close to getting jumped, beaten, and robbed. Since then, I've let go of the burden that my ex was causing. This happened to me last weekend. I was driving home from work at 3 a.m. and needed some gas. I pull into this gas station that's closed, but pumps are on, and immediately see a car pull in from the other side of the gas station. They slowly roll by me. I look in their car, and they're both staring me down. They paused at one of the gas pumps, but I said nope, and left without filling up. I think my gut was right, because as soon as I started driving, those guys just drove off. They were not there to get gas. There were a few growing up. 2 friends and I were exploring a nearby mountain, and we noticed what looked like a large animal den at the base of a huge pine tree. It was early spring, so we could see there were human footprints in the snow heading up to the den. We assumed it was just someone else checking out that hole. As we approached the hole, from about 30 feet away, the man abruptly emerged, carrying a shovel and yelling at us. We took off running and told our fat friend to hurry up, or he's going to get deliveranced. The crazy guy eventually gave up. However, one of the friends claimed to have seen him outside their house later, so who knows. There were also the time in 3rd or 4th grade when a kid tried to bring a loaded 30-06 on the bus to shoot some of us. The bus driver shoved him out of the bus and stood in the doorway blocking him out. He aimed right at her face several times, but she didn't budge. They had their verbal standoff until police arrived. He ran off into the woods with his rifle, and we went to school. He ended up going to juvenile hall until I saw him again around 8th grade. Went for a hike in March with my ex and our toddler. When we arrived, we found the trail closed. My ex said it was fine to hike anyway. It was about 4 in the afternoon. Our car was the only one in the parking lot. We were about an hour's drive from home, and no one knew where we were. This was before cell phones. Against my better judgment, we started out. We lost our way within 30 minutes. It took over an hour to find the main trail, as I tried to calm my rising hysteria and anger. We stopped for dinner on the way home, and I started shaking as I realized how disastrous that hike could have gone. That was in the top 10 reasons for our divorce. After that, I never listened to anyone when my instincts told me not to. We spent the 4th of July in the wilderness. I and an ex-girlfriend figured we'd sit at the base of the foothills and take in the town fireworks. We decided to sit picnic style, covering the entire 9 yards. We're sitting there around dusk, with no one around, and then I look about 125 meters away and saw that something was in the tall grass with its head popped up. It looked like a mountain cat at a distance. I didn't think too much of it. I thought my mind was just playing tricks on me, so I looked away. A minute or two later, I looked back over in the general direction, and this cat is a little more defined and making a direct line for us. I ask the ex-girlfriend if she sees what I see, and she says, "Oh my god, that's a mountain lion." We didn't hesitate to ask questions. We immediately left. This will sound insane, but I promise all the details are true. When we were around 14, a friend and I struck up a conversation with a traffic warden who worked near our school in central London. He talked about his celebrity friends and introduced us to R&B stars we liked. We assumed it was bullshit, but he invited us to meet him at Heathrow Airport one Saturday morning, where he was indeed collecting an R&B group called Intro, who invited us to go and hang out at their hotel. We spent a day and night with them, and both spent alone time with 2 of the guys, if you catch my drift. A few months later, we received an invitation to meet R. Kelly. We're both huge fans, so we accepted without hesitation and made our way to his hotel in Swiss Cottage, London. There we are taken to a function-type room with a large entourage, but no sign of R. Kelly yet. As time went by, the atmosphere started to feel more off, like we might not be able to just get up and leave. He consistently assures us that he will return soon. I cannot express to you quite how poor our decision-making was at this point in our lives and how much we were big fans of R. Kelly. But at a certain point, it's like we both suddenly realized that our something was very wrong. We announced our intention to use the bathroom and quickly made our way back to the tube. Our friend was pretty pissed and said we'd let him down. Clearly he was some sort of fixer, groomer, pimp. When the news broke about R. Kelly, a good 20 years later, we were no longer such close friends but exchanged a few messages, incredulous that our instincts had actually protected us for once in our foolish teenage years. My dad had just gotten out of jail and had a deep, deep hatred for my mother. His only goal was to murder her after he was on a serial killer movie unstoppable kind of bender due to 2 days of freedom, aka 2 days of meth use. We were notified of my father's release 2 days before, so my mom packed her shit and moved in with me. Now, this is before security cameras and smartphones. So, anyways, my mom worked nights. She clocks out at midnight and proceeds to drive to my apartment. Unbeknownst to her, my father had stolen a car and hid outside of her work. He discreetly followed her to my apartment building and lay in wait. Well, morning comes and my mom realizes she locked her keys in her car. So, she calls AAA, and they come unlock the car for free. My father is still watching from up the street in a stolen car, so my mom thanks the man and goes back in. From the street to my apartment complex is a rather long walk. My apartment complex lacked a security gate. He exits the building and maneuvers discreetly to avoid my mother's attention. He watches her go up 2 flights of stairs. He knocks on my door and says, "Ma'am, it's AAA. I forgot to have you sign the invoice." My mom innocently opens the door and barely gets it open 1 inch before he forces his way in. There's a one-sided struggle. The situation involves a significant amount of physical and violence. Then, they leave in my mom's car. The above paragraph was told to me by my mother and the cops. I obviously wasn't there. So anyway, I get home after my shift and see there's been a struggle. There's blood. Broken picture frames have been used as weapons, and some of my belongings have disappeared. I just knew. I firmly believed that he had managed to locate her. My heart sank down to my feet. What made things even worse was the fact that the Los Angeles Police Department wouldn't do anything. This isn't an isolated incident. Every time he's released from jail, it's a straightforward situation for us, and LAPD knows it, but they don't give a f. So I knew it was solely up to me to find her. The day Mom got the letter that he was getting out, she came over, and we made a contingency plan. My father was a homeless drug addict. He had no friends or family beside us. He would do anything for $1. We knew we could buy some time with him if we said something along the lines of, "Okay, I buried some money in case of an emergency. It's a lot. I'll take you to go get it if you let me go." My dad's mindset is that more money equals more meth. So sure enough, per my mom, since I wasn't there, once in her car, he falls for our plan. LA has a huge park called Griffith Park, and my mom and I used to go hiking on this trail. So our scheme was to tell him the money's buried in a can by a certain tree. So they drive there. Then start walking. It's a Tuesday at 12:15 p.m. The particular trail is not very busy. I show up and sure enough, I see my mom's car parked at the trailhead. I know she was alive and I was going to rescue her. The sheer terror and panic in my heart and soul had been replaced with hope. After a brief hike, I find both of them kneeling in the dirt just off of the trail. Neither sees me, as I make it a point to be super quiet. With my dad down on all fours, I jumped on his back and we wrestled a bit. My mom took off screaming toward the parking lot. I eventually reached a leveraged position where I was able to choke him unconscious. Or so I thought. I threw his limp body down and turned to run after Mom, but he sprung back up quickly, and a chase ensued. He talked to me after a few steps. We are currently engaged in a heated exchange. Mom is nowhere to be seen. I end up beating him to a bloody pulp, ended up breaking a bone in both my left hand and my right hand. He's alive, but bad. Bloody. I hope he understands this message. I leave him there and make it back to Mom. She's waiting by my truck crying. Dad has her keys, so we get in my truck and he goes straight for the nearest police station. The rest of the story is history. 2 days later, they pick him up while he's sleeping in an unknown park. The county hospital sends him to a county jail after one night. The judicial process is a very slow one in Los Angeles County. The trial takes place a few months later. Mother and I testify. The police testify. My father spent a decade in prison. He died a few days after he was released. He overdosed on drugs in the parking lot of the Griffith Park Trail. The world is a better place without him, dead. I'm married now. Mom has grandkids and a daughter-in-law. There is lots of love in life. Love has been replaced all the darkness in my life. LAPD. This isn't as terrifying as others, but it's my most terrifying moment. You know when you hear on TV or radio, this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is just a test. Well, I was living on a spit of land with the Atlantic Ocean on one side and a river on the other, and a nor'easter was barreling up the coast. It was just me and my baby at home at the time. Suddenly I heard on the radio the familiar buzz of the emergency broadcast system. Then, "This is not a test." Repeat, "This is not a test." Then the electricity went out. This was before cell phones and computers. I didn't know what to do because it was very much a flood-prone zone, and I didn't want to drive into a flood with my baby. About an hour later, the National Guard came banging on the door and evacuated us in a big army truck. That was scary. I wished I had a cell phone back then, as it would have allowed me to capture a photo of the soldiers holding my baby as I climbed into the truck. One time I took my sisters to a local park with my wife. We had a wonderful time, and when it was time to go, I noticed some guy in a beige sedan pulled out and was following us. I wasn't sure, but I remembered when I was young, someone was following my mom around once, long story. So I just kind of felt it. I whipped into a grocery store parking lot and parked somewhere. My wife started wondering what was up, so I explained my thoughts and saw he pulled into the spot at the very end of the parking lot staring. He didn't get out. He didn't move, so I pulled out in front of him to block his car, and we had a fun little stare down. After a second, I pulled off down the street into a Sonic parking lot and back up to the store. Sure enough, he had vanished. I'm uncertain as to whether he was actually following us or if I simply frightened him away from purchasing milk. However, it caused me considerable anxiety at the time. I was at the beach with my little brother and dad. We wandered into the ocean maybe a little further than we really meant to. As we were hanging out in the water, suddenly a fish jumps out of it right near us. We chuckle at what we thought was a humorous moment. Then another fish jumps out of the water even closer to us. Then a third. As my dad and I looked at the water, a huge shadow swam between my dad and me and my brother. A fin broke the water surface around me, and another fish jumped between us. Dad and I locked eyes, and without saying a word, I understood I was to grab my brother as we tried to get back to the beach with Dad following us. Right as we were about to move, it turned out to be a dolphin. I'd never been so scared and relieved within a few moments. About 20 years ago, I was at a bar in Baltimore with my wife's friend from college and her new boyfriend. Wife's friend is white, boyfriend was black. My wife and I are white. A big group of skinheads come in the bar. Docks, rolled up jeans, suspenders, those green and orange reversible jackets, the whole look. After a couple of car bombs that they chugged while shouting, "Oi!" they started giving our table stern looks. I look at the boyfriend, whose name I have unfortunately forgotten, and say, "Dude, I'm sorry, but I think we might want to get the hell out of here." He looks at me and says, "Dude, I was about to say the same freaking thing." We dropped a bunch of cash on the table to cover our bill and noped out of there fast. There have been recent wildfires in California. At 5-something in the morning, I look out the window and see flames. At the time, I had no idea where exactly they were or how close they were. I hurriedly woke up my husband, gathered our cats and go bag, and swiftly fled. House was fine. The flames were from some foliage on a fence 2 blocks over, but I later found burnt-out embers on my lawn, the size of my hand, blown there by the wind. All it would take was for one of those embers to land in an unfavorable spot. I know 2 people who lost their homes. My friend's house is okay, but the houses across the street from her burned down, and the smoke contamination at her house is horrible. We were at the beach when I was 11, and the day was good but not sunny. There was a forecast for later rain. Far away on the horizon, I saw a black line in the sky. I counted a few minutes and looked again. The black line was now a thick black bar. A couple of minutes later, it was the darkest storm cloud I've ever seen. I went to my parents and said, "We need to leave now." As I pointed at the cloud, we could see flashes of lightning. We barely had time to drive and stop under a bridge when the town was hit with, according to the radio, 80-mile-per-hour winds and hail the size of eggs. The storm didn't last 10 minutes, and the sun was back. I felt awful for the people at the beach. The hospital was so packed with people in need of first aid for cuts and bruises that they installed a tent in front of the hospital for the smaller injuries. I was 8 at a restaurant with my cousin's mom and aunt, who also the same age as us kids at the time, 8 to 12. We were celebrating birthdays. It was a small, unassuming restaurant. 2 guys came in acting suspicious. They kept looking over at our table. We were the only ones there, other than the two people working. One kept feeling around in his pocket. The guy was extremely nervous. He went outside and threw up. After a little while, his partner went out and seemed to be trying to talk him into going back in, but he wouldn't. The partner came back in by himself for a while, but eventually left without ordering anything. My mom was on alert and was telling us 4 kids to get up now and leave, which is what I think prompted the guys to leave. I knew as a kid something was very wrong. As an adult, I 100% believe it was a planned armed robbery, but the one guy had second thoughts after seeing a mom with 4 cute little girls there. If they're out there, thanks for not traumatizing us. This was 30 plus years ago. I was at an outdoor music festival as a teen in the heat of summer with a delay in the setup to the next band. We were in the middle of the crowd and the energy was becoming very tense. People started throwing flattened water bottles across the crowd and at the stagehands that were moving as fast as they could to fix whatever the issue was. By the time the pre-show music started, the crowd began to sway involuntarily from assholes pushing from the back. We agreed to leave, but the band started as we tried to move sideways out of the crowd, and everyone rushed forward. A 300-pound dude fell on my friend and me, and it took 5 men to get him off of us, while others around us were trying to hold back the rush. Once we were up and moving again, a mosh pit broke out around us. I will never forget the 6'5" punk with a red mohawk who saw our trouble and shouted, "The only way out is up," and offered us his laced hands for us to step in as he tossed us up to the crowd surfing out. I almost lost my shoe while crowd surfing, but we made it out safely and hung back for the rest of the shows. God save the punks. My friend and I went to a Boston Red Sox game on Patriots Day years ago, which also happened to be the day of the Boston Marathon. We found a parking spot a little ways away from the marathon finish line. I've been to several games with this friend, and normally we like to sit in the stadium and wait for the majority of people to leave at the end of the game before we head out. But I really wanted to leave immediately this day. We proceeded to walk along the marathon finish line, passing it on our way to the car. As soon as we reached our car, we heard loud bangs and screams. Shortly after, my mom called to check on me, mentioning that she'd seen explosions and knew we were at the Sox game. It's crazy to think that if we had waited like we normally do the extra 10 minutes, we would have probably been right at the finish line when the explosions happened. We were fortunate. This story is far too complicated to explain in detail. The story unfolded late at night by a canal in the deserted area of Canto, Vietnam, 1971. A vital moment was when our TCNs, Koreans, met to negotiate with their TCNs. Their Koreans brought along 6 Republic of Korea MPs, big nasty looking fellows. Frank and I, the Americans representing the company, didn't understand the discussion in Korean, but the MPs started looking at us funny. We were leaning on our car. Accountant Kim, on our side, took out a cigarette, checked his pockets and called out, "Frank, can you give me a light?" He walked over. When Frank lit his cigarette, Kim quietly said one word, "Leave." We engaged in a boisterous conversation with him for a minute before I casually moved to the passenger side, yanked open the doors and hastily departed. Their MPs caught up with us just as we reached a well-lit parking lot by a hotel with 2 jeep loads of American MPs. We casually parked. The Koreans briskly left. The following day, Kim informed us that the group was saying, "We're all Koreans. Dump the Americans in the canal, and we can settle this between ourselves."